In today's video, I'm going to talk about Vivek Ramaswamy and the one thing I think he gets right. If you don't know who Vivek Ramaswamy is, he's a presidential candidate running for the Republican nomination. I don't consider myself an expert on Vivek. I have read part of his book and I've listened to him in a number of podcasts and interviews. Whether you like Vivek or not, whether you agree with his stated policies or whether you like his performance at the debates or not, I think there's one thing that Vivek gets right that most people, if they gave it a listen, would probably find they agree with, at least to some extent. So that's what I want to highlight in this video. If you listen to Vivek for any length of time, you'll probably see him make this point in one form or another. Basically, he talks about how we have a fractured national identity, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think most people will agree that the nation is pretty divided and polarized along the subject of politics. And politicians generally try to cast themselves as uniters. I think what Vivek does differently is he actually addresses the root cause, what I think is the root cause, and that is a fractured national identity. And he highlights the need for a conversation about that identity. We need to have a meaningful conversation about what our first principles are. While we might not agree on the best approach to every problem, just start with first principles and work your way from there. Got a much better chance of teasing out solutions that the majority of the country would agree with. So I'm going to crop in a clip that was actually put up by Forbes, but I'm going to edit this clip a little bit just for brevity's sake. The entire clip, I believe, is 6 or 7 minutes. I'll put a link to that below, but I'm just going to crop in the parts that I think are relevant to my point. Also, I'm going to apologize quickly for the audio. Periodically there's some buzzing in the background in this clip that's in the original clip, and I can't figure out how to get it out, so be forewarned. There's nothing wrong with your speaker or your headphones. It's just the audio in this clip isn't the best.
Tell me your name again, sir.
My name is Brian.
Brian, it's good to see you.
Yeah, one of the major issues I see is the division in this country. It's almost like you can't even be friends with someone that thinks differently than you. And this country is so divided, and I think, is there a leader somewhere in this country that can actually unite us? Are you that guy? I don't think Trump has the ability to unite us. I think we need to unite this country. How do you do that? And do you see that as an important issue, or is it too far gone? Like, I almost feel it is.
It is not too far gone. I understand why you would think so. It is not too far gone. First of all, I want to say something as a preface to this. This is not a one-man job. Do not expect someone coming from on high from the White House to save us. I'm not letting you off the hook that easily. You do have an obligation to continue your friendships with people who disagree with you. Right? If we're going to be saved, it's going to be because we save ourselves. Right? We each have to practice what we preach, be the change that we want to see in our country. Right? This is up to us. It starts with our culture. I don't believe, and you will never hear this from me, some sort of false kumbaya optimism, it's morning in America again. It's not. Not right now. It can be. But we have to see the present with clear eyes to make it true. So here's what I will do. I'm already doing it. If you see me not doing it, hold my feet to the fire and make sure I continue to do it. We will talk to everybody on this campaign. I don't think it's a good thing when my fellow Republicans say they won't talk to NBC News because NBC News is not nice to them. From Don Lemon to Chuck Todd to the Breakfast Club to New England College when we were here in New Hampshire, to college campuses across this country, to the south side of Chicago, to Kensington in the inner city of Pennsylvania, at least my pledge is I will show up. We will have the conversation. We may not agree with everything, but at least we're going to talk in the open. And you know what I've discovered through that? Not in the media part of this so much. That's a distorted monster of its own. But amongst real people in this country, when we went to the south side of Chicago, we left with far more common ground than any of us, myself included, expected to find, with respect to the importance of sealing the southern border, with the respect to the importance of why it could possibly be that we're spending $200 billion to secure somebody else's border against an invasion when we're not protecting against an invasion on our own southern border, where many of those people are now living in South Shore High School, which has been turned into an encampment for migrants, when people in that community rightly ask the question, well, what about me as an American who lives here? And I think the America First movement is not just for conservatives, it is for all Americans, by definition. And so I think there's unity around these issues. But I think the way we get to national unity is not by, it's going to sound odd when I say this, but I think it is deeply true. The way we get to national unity is not through compromise on our principles. The way we get to national unity is by being uncompromising about the principles that unite all of us as Americans. We have, for the last decade, I grew up into this, last couple decades in this country, celebrated our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all of the ways we are really just the same as Americans, bound by a common set of ideals that set this nation into motion 250 years ago. And let's be really honest with ourselves. Those are radical ideals. Those are extreme ideals. Free speech, the idea that you get to speak your mind as long as I get to in return. Self-governance, the idea that we the people can be trusted to sort out the most difficult disagreements that we have in a constitutional republic. That we're a nation of laws, not of men. That we believe in the unbridled pursuit of excellence. These are radical ideals because for most of human history it was done the other way. So, no, it's not through moderation that we will achieve national unity. We will achieve national unity by embracing the radicalism of the American Revolution itself. That is what I believe. That is what unites us. That is what we mean when we say, e pluribus unum. From many, one. That is what reunited us after the Civil War. That is what won us 2 world wars in the Cold War. That is the vision that still gives hope to the free world. And that is what we will need to revive if we have a last standing chance. And you believe it, I will stand here firm until they force me out. We will make sure that we reunite this country as one nation, not some national divorce, but a national revival where our best days are still ahead of us, where we're not in some divided decline, but we are still in our ascent.
Is there something to what he's saying? Is there something exceptional about the American system? Oftentimes, it's in vogue to be critical of the American system, and this is true of people in the West in general. It's in vogue to be exceptionally critical of the place that you live in, and to focus on the most negative aspects of our history. More so, you notice this among the left, and oftentimes among younger people that they don't really appreciate the system that they inherited because it's like water to them. It's always been there, and they've never had to live in places where it's a lot worse. And I think the best evidence for why the American system is exceptional, why the West in general is exceptional, is the way people vote with their feet. People come from around the world to immigrate to America. So if the West is so bad, how come people from all over the world want to come here? Well, people come to America because they're looking for freedom and they're looking for opportunity. And if you're a critic of this system, you might want to ask yourself, well, if it's so bad here, how come people want to come from all over the world? How come we've had wave after wave of immigration for generations? If they're coming here in pursuit of freedom and opportunity, it probably means the places that they're leaving, there's less freedom and opportunity. I mean, in the case of America, we have the largest economy in the world. Certainly not the most populated country in the world. Why are we the largest market in the world then? Why are our citizens have more wealth collectively than any other place on the planet? Well, there must be something about the system that works. But you don't see people immigrating en masse to China. You don't see people immigrating in mass to the Middle East or sub-Saharan Africa. The flow of people is predominantly in one direction. It's people that want to come to America and the West in general. And I would argue the reason why most of those people are coming this direction is because they want more freedom and they want more opportunity, and that's what America offers. So if you were born here and your family's been here for generations and you really don't know anything else, it's really easy to be hypercritical of, every mistake the West has made in the past. But if that's you, my challenge to you would be, compared to what? Where did they do it better? And if it's so bad here, how come people are still immigrating to this country in mass? People want to get here so bad that many of them are willing to break the law to get here. That's why we have had a somewhat of a crisis on the southern border for decades, because people are willing to break our immigration laws to get here. So while there's always room for improvement, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Have some admiration for what we get right here. And I think Vivek, as the son of immigrants, who still has, close ties to the country his family immigrated from, has a sort of a unique perspective on that. He knows what his family was fleeing to come here. He knows of the opportunities they were seeking. And he's a good example of someone taking advantage of those opportunities. I mean, he did very well for himself in this country. Now, there's a part of success that is luck, and there's a part of success that is diligence and hard work and making good choices. And people debate ad nauseum what ratio makes up success and which aspect is doing most of the heavy lifting. But from a pragmatic point of view, I would argue that it only makes sense to focus on the part of the equation you can control, because by definition you can't control the other part. So if you're not as successful as Vivek and or you just haven't achieved the American dream that you're looking for, one might be tempted to blame it all on the system. The system's holding you down. But I would argue a more practical approach would be to take a critical look at the guy in the mirror and start thinking about how you can make better choices and take better advantage of the opportunities that you have in this country. Because that's the only part of the equation that you can change. I'm going to work in one more clip of Vivek that I like, and it comes from a podcast by Bill Maher. He's got a show on the internet called Club Random. I'm not a huge Bill Maher fan. I think he can be obnoxious at times and talk over his guests and not let them make their point, and I think he has a lot of blind spots, but I will give him credit for having a fairly decent show. Brings out a lot of interesting guests. And a few months back he had Vivek on there, and there's an exchange where Maher goes into detail saying how he just wishes we could live in the time that we actually live in. And I think this is a big blind spot for people on the left in particular. Rather than live in 2023 and deal with the problems that are facing us presently, they want to pretend that we live in a different time and preoccupy themselves with fighting dragons that have largely been slain. And that's a distraction from dealing with the more pressing problems that we should be addressing in our own time. So without further ado, here's a segment with Bill Maher and Vivek on Club Random.
Well, I will say this, where I think we're fairly in agreement on. I keep saying my mantra is, let's live in the year we're living in.
Yeah.
Because so many people seem to, on the left, this is a left thing, they seem to want to insist on having our deplorable past permanently stand in for our much improved present, which doesn't mean there isn't work to be done. There certainly are still racists in America and racism, but I feel like we are very often not treating it like, oh, this is 2023 now, and this is where we are. This is the work that has to be done, but let's not be chasing these phantoms of racism that aren't the parts that exist anymore.
Yeah, and I think that we can celebrate that.
Yeah, we should.
I think that we should celebrate that,
should.
right? I think that we all should. We're all, I mean, in some ways, I am pro-progress, right? Does that make me a progressive, a conservative? I don't know what those labels are, but I'm pro-progress. And so, I think that the fact that what I tell some people, often friends on the left is, Have we been hypocritical for most of our national history? Yes, we have. But our worst hypocrisies...
Hypocritical, you mean like all men are created equal?
Yeah, that we don't live up to... And the point I was getting to is those hypocrisies are our best evidence that we have ideals at all. Right? Nobody calls Iran a hypocrite.
That's a great point.
Nobody calls China a hypocrite. You can't call them a hypocrite because to be a hypocrite, you had to have the ideals in the first place.
Right.
So then now you have ideals. Now, are we a nation of gods or are we a nation of men? We're a nation of human beings, okay?
Right.
Human beings are by definition flawed. So if you have a nation built on ideals and it's comprised of human beings and not angels, then you will fall short of those ideals. It's just like definitionally what happens.
No,
but at least we have ideals.
Right.
That's what my
and also that we do improve.
Yeah.
That, this is what's so annoying about, I've done many editorials about this, just like, again, just live in the year we're living in and stop like going after Columbus and like, yes, people were atrocious back then. He committed atrocities.
I mean, there are elements of Columbus that we ought to admire and still celebrate
Well,
today.
we wouldn't be here. Well, I guess we would. Somebody would have found
Somebody would have, but
found it eventually. It's so
but
big.
it's the spirit of exploration, the spirit of being the unafraid, right? That's what we take on.
To have the balls.
So it's my theory that much of the division we're seeing, in large part, comes from people that are desperately trying to live in the past. Rather than address the problems of the present, they're pretending like we live in a time that we don't. I have some theories as to why people would want to do that. I guess, for one, it's easy. Tackling the problems that we're presently facing is more difficult. As where it's easier to virtue signal and say, well, I'm against racism. Well, find me the people that are for it. I mean, this isn't the 1960s and we're not in the Deep South. There's no segregation today. We don't have people in white hoods running around terrorizing the population. But people want to pretend like they do, and I guess a good example I would point to is the Jussie Smollett case. People were eager to believe his story, even though it turned out to be a complete fabrication. People wanted to believe that MAGA Trump supporters were hunting down gay black men in Metro Chicago at 2 a.m. in the morning during a snowstorm, because it fit the view of the world that they want to believe that we live in. And there's also political reasons for it. I mean, if you can paint your political rivals as being sympathetic to white supremacists, well, there's a big advantage in that. So I think there's an element of politics at play. There's also an element of virtue signaling. Look at me, I'm a good person. I'm against all the bad things. Hashtag, I'm a good person. Hashtag, I support the current thing. But it's much harder to deal with like actual problems. Say, unchecked immigration or the fentanyl crisis. Rising suicide rates, which are no doubt related to a widespread sense of purposelessness. It's much harder to deal with the real problems that are facing society today, so it's easier to pretend like we live in a time that we don't and try to deal with that time's problems. If you lived in the 1960s in the South, well, it really was a courageous stance to be against racism and to be against segregation. 2020, 2023, not so much. Not a real issue in our time. So that's what I like about Vivek. He's a sharp guy talking about problems that I think really face society today, and he's willing to have an honest conversation about them. And the fact that I'm willing to support Vivek is evidence that we live in a better time. We're all familiar with Martin Luther King's famous speech, his I Have a Dream speech. I'm not an expert on the civil rights movement. I'm not an expert on Martin Luther King, but I'm pretty sure almost everybody has heard that speech, or at least parts of it.
Freedom and justice, I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Now, I am that dream, and in fact, most of us are the realization of that dream. Most of us in America and in the West do look at the world like that. We are judging people by the content of the character and not their immutable characteristics. You know, one of my favorite economists and political philosophers is Thomas Sowell. Do I like Thomas Sowell because he's a black guy? No, I like him because he's a brilliant economist. It's very interesting to listen to. I've listened to hours and hours of Thomas Sowell. One of my favorite authors and political commentators, contemporary political commentators, is Douglas Murray, who is an openly gay British conservative. Now, do I listen to him because I care about his sexuality? No, I listen to him because he's a brilliant author and he makes a lot of interesting and compelling commentary on issues that I care about. And if the primary election was held in my state today, I would probably vote for Vivek Ramaswamy, because of all the candidates, he's the one that resonates the most with me. Now, him and I come from totally different backgrounds. You know, my ancestors were European. I'm Anglican and German, one mix or another. He's a second-generation immigrant, and his parents came from India. Entirely different continent than my ancestors came from. Yet, I'm more than willing to vote for him. Not because we share a common heritage, but because we share similar ideas. We seem to be working from the same first principles. And if we are going to bring this country back together, that's the way to do it, in my view. We need to live in the year that we're actually living in and face the problems that we're actually facing, and not pretend we live in a different time in a different place. And we need to start with first principles. First principles like the ones that inspired the Bill of Rights. You know, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. Third Amendment really isn't talked about that much anymore, but definitely the Fourth Amendment, you know, our Fifth and Sixth Amendment, the right to fair and impartial trials. You know, to keep the country free and to keep the country full of opportunity, we need to make sure that everybody is treated the same before the law. And those are things that you'll get almost everybody to agree on. Everybody wants the right to speak their own mind. But that comes at the cost of letting other people do the same. So those are the kind of things I mean when I say first principles. And that's what I like about Vivek, and that's why I'd probably vote for him. And actually, it would be a first for me. It would be the first time I ever voted for somebody that was actually younger than me for public office. I guess this means I must be middle-aged now. You've been watching the Fletch Report. If you're hearing this, it means you've made it to the end of the video. But before you click onto the next thing and continue down whatever rabbit hole you're on YouTube or Rumble, I've got a small favor to ask. If you found value in my content and you want to help the channel out, the best thing you can do is share it with somebody else that you think will find value in it. Don't forget to hit the like button. Subscribe if you want to see more. Links to the channel on YouTube and Rumble will be provided below. Additionally, I'm making a Facebook page for the channel as well as a X/formerly Twitter. Feel free to follow me on those platforms as well. If you're feeling exceptionally generous, provided in the description below will be a link to Buy Me a Coffee, which is the online equivalent of a tip jar. Thanks for watching, and thanks for supporting the channel.